Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to our course. We're meeting under slightly different circumstances, although I suppose we should be in some ways grateful that we can meet at all. So here we are. So you're all very welcome. I'm going to begin with two sets of videos, two sets of introductory lectures. One set of introductory lectures, which we'll be doing here, deals with the substantive material of the course. I'll try to give you an introduction to the course, an overview of the course, so that you can see how it's going to unfold. Right, to give you a sort of, map of the general territory that we're going to be covering. Another introduction will have to do specifically with our course as an online course. So we'll be dealing with some housekeeping matters, as well as with some Canvas matters, things like that. Okay, so two sets of introductions. Our first one, though, is going to address what we're going to be covering. So if this video, it's just of me, as you can see. I'm going to ask you to consult the PowerPoint. There's one PowerPoint for the two sets of introductory video lectures. So if you can open that up and be following along as we go, that would be great. Okay, I'll indicate the slide for you. My name, I suppose I should have started with that, is Dr. Mark Raftery-Skehan. My email you will see on the first slide, okay? As I say, welcome. I know we're meeting in a way that's not ideal. It would be infinitely preferable to be in a classroom with you, preferably in SOM 205, which they normally give me, but no such luck this time. And we are going to be meeting via Canvas, via video, and via the text that I will put online for you that are online in Canvas. Okay, so let's begin slide 3 by introducing our topic, right? Aesthetics. Perhaps the first way to introduce it is as a subdiscipline, right? A subdiscipline within the broader array of philosophical disciplines. Philosophy, if you like, is made up of several disciplines. Certain philosophers will argue for the primacy and centrality of certain of its disciplines over others. Aesthetics as a formal discipline, I suppose, is only a relatively recent discipline, certainly compared to, say, ontology or metaphysics. It would often be paired with ethics. Now, why is that? What has the study of beauty, of sensuous experience, of beauty, of art, what is that to do with ethics, with the good, right? What does beauty have to do with the good, other than being one of the central values that Plato esteemed, right? The true, the good, and the beautiful, right? The kind of triumvirate of values. Well, the two of them are value-based judgments, right? If ethics deals with what we ought to do, how we ought to act, and that entails judgments based on values, on what is good, what is wrong, what is moral, what is immoral. These are not judgments of the true in the way that a scientific judgment would be. Right? An objective scientific judgment would be different from saying that such and such an action is wrong. We may consider, you know, both assertions to be true, but they'd be true in very different ways, right? And as with ethics, so with beauty, right? The determination, the judgment of something as beautiful would seem to imply an evaluation according to certain values, aesthetic values this time, um, that make the judgment possible. So values seem to lie, different values, different types of values, if you like, seem to lie at the root of aesthetic and ethical judgments. And they both would seem to be different from judgments of mere empirical truth. Right? If I judge that the book is on my desk, that seems to be a different judgment to lying is wrong or that's a beautiful painting. Okay, so in that sense, it's a values-based discipline. Okay, the word itself, aesthetics, comes from aesthesis, right? Simply means the senses, right? The five senses, sensory experience. Um, Now, aesthetics as a discipline really only comes into being with certain pre-Kantian thinkers and with Kant. So we're talking about 300 years or so um, maximum of it being at all a recognized, formalized discipline within philosophy. Um, that sense of aesthetic as aesthesis and the senses, you can still find it, right? You can still find it in that non-artistic, having nothing to do with beauty. When Kant speaks of his transcendental aesthetic in the critique of pure reason, right? Transcendental aesthetic has to do with um, space and time, right? What for Kant are a priori forms of intuition. What does that mean? Well, everything we receive through the senses has to conform to our forms of intuition, right? Forms of intuition being that they take place in space and they take place, events take place according to temporal succession. Okay, so in that sense, he's still using aesthetic in a very literal sense, right? But of course, aesthetic will come on, will kind of shift to having a meaning much more closely identified with the experience of the beauty, uh, with the experience of art, natural beauty as well, especially for Kant, and especially to do with the experience of art. Okay. Now, uh, if the discipline, the sub-discipline of aesthetics begins prior to Kant and then with Kant, this of course should not be taken to mean that aesthetic experience or art had not hitherto been a subject of philosophical inquiry. Of course it had been. Most famously, no doubt, perhaps for you in any case, with Plato, right? Plato reflected on aesthetic experience. He reflected on art. He reflected on image making. And he was somewhat distrustful of it. Okay. And that perhaps had the effect of ensuring that aesthetics only came to be taken seriously as a potential topic for philosophical inquiry, because he had had that um, his theory of art, if you like, was probably not as radical or derogatory of art as it's often made out to be. Of course, we all know he talks about banishing the artists and the poets from the ideal republic, but there is perhaps a more subtle um, theory of image making at work there, where the image has a certain power to whereby we can move from the image to the original. The danger of image making for Plato had to do with, well, you're making a duplication of an original, and the danger is that we'll get confused. We won't know what's the original and what's the copy anymore. So for him, it seems somewhat senseless. Okay, but nonetheless, as the cave allegory itself, right, a complex series of images itself, Plato being a great allegorist, right, he places a value on being able to move from the image, from the copy, to penetrate through to the original, right? The would-be philosopher uh, comes to recognize the shadows on the cave wall as but images of a more profound, a deeper reality. When he sees the reflections in the pools after having escaped the cave, he comes to recognize them as images of an empirical reality, and he comes to recognize the things of this world as copies of the forms, right? So this ability to penetrate from the image through to the original is important. The danger with image making is that you are creating unnecessary duplicates, right? So, you know, Plato's mistrust of art, a general mistrust in Western philosophy of the senses, right? Think of Descartes' radical doubt, right? I cannot trust anything that I come to know, I come to experience through the senses, because I know the senses have deceived me in the past. Therefore, I must dismiss, if I'm in search of certainty, I must dismiss everything that has come from the senses. So aesthetics, if you like, because of the nature of its object, um, artistic objects, aesthetic experience, um, studying it was somewhat frowned upon, and it only came to be a legitimate object of philosophical inquiry quite late, or if you like, relatively recently. Okay. Now, in certainly in the time of Kant, right, it very much has to do with the study of beauty, right? With the experience of beautiful things, and with judging something to be beautiful. Judging, right? When I say that is beautiful, I am, for Kant, making a judgment that it is beautiful, right? An aesthetic judgment, or a judgment of taste, he would call it, as we shall see. And for Kant, because he's talking about beauty and because he's talking about aesthetic experience, aesthetics covers both the natural objective beauty, as well as the man-made, culturally produced work of art. Right? Both are included. Now, with Hegel, and increasingly so in aesthetics as a discipline, um, it will only be art. It will be art that will take pride of place, almost exclusively, perhaps, right, as the object of aesthetics. The question of beauty as well will perhaps recede from prominence, right? Kant was interested in beauty. He was also interested in the experience of the sublime. Hegel, we shall see, and certainly modernist art, seems to be less preoccupied with uh, the aesthetic object being beautiful. We all perhaps know of modernist artworks that don't seem to make any attempt to be beautiful, right? Um, and aesthetics reflects that in its own interests, right? Nonetheless, the question of beauty will be very important for Kant, as we shall see. Now, um, philosophical aesthetics is an approach to aesthetic experience and the aesthetic object that differs from other academic modes of approach to the same objects and experiences. Art history, art criticism, right? There's no discipline called art appreciation, right? Some of you may be taking this course this semester, right? There's no discipline. There's art history. You have a department of art history. And there is such a thing as art criticism, right? Um, these disciplines very much start from the concrete, right? Start from the artwork and work their way up, right? They're concerned with the evolution of art, historical, social functions of art. Um, they're concerned with uh, the differences in the forms of art, different periods of art, um, the epochs of art, right? Um, philosophical aesthetics, um, philosophy tends to begin from a somewhat more abstract place, right? Uh, asking questions in its time-honored form, right? What is the typical question of philosophy? Well, what is? What is? What is beauty? What is art? Okay, and it will not proceed to answer this by saying that art history can give us an answer to those questions, or that psychology can give us an answer to the question of aesthetic experience. No, these are fundamentally questions that need a different type of response, a philosophical response. Now, um, this poses some difficulties, right? Because how can we really talk about what is art if we are not terribly familiar with the history of art as it has unfolded? How can we ask that question if we have not been at least initiated into the ways in which we can analyze an artwork, critique an artwork, um, have been exposed to artworks in different forms of different from different periods. So um, there's an element of circularity there, right? That well, to talk about what art is, you've got to know the actual different artworks, right, in their rich diversity. Okay, but equally, when we encounter an artwork and we recognize it as an artwork, then presumably we have some sort of an idea of what makes an artwork. Right? So it's a presupposed response to that philosophical question of what is art. Now, for me personally, I think that a it's good to come at aesthetics from both perspectives, right? From both the philosophical perspective and from that more concrete, from the ground up type of perspective. And ordinarily, I would have included um, more art history, more art criticism in our course. Our course is somewhat truncated simply because we're doing it within a quarter, right? So unfortunately, some of that has had to go. I do hope you are taking that art appreciation course. Some of you this semester that will, I hope, help you. Okay. Okay. I've mentioned the natural object of beauty, and I've mentioned the artwork. But of course, we cannot remain oblivious to the fact that something seems to have superseded art in the last, well, it's very hard to put a kind of, a year or a decade on these things, but art prior to the sort of, you know, proliferation of the image uh, with the advent of modern culture, images used for commercial purposes, the images that now seem to be in every public place and indeed in increasingly in every private place, right? We are exposed to God knows how many images every day that barely even register with us. Right? So we must recognize that um, our own approach to aesthetic experience is no doubt shaped and formed by what we've been exposed to. And in our epoch, if I can put myself in the same generation as you, which is stretching things a little bit, no doubt, um, um, you will not have known a world without the internet. Um, I increasingly can't remember a world without the internet, not for reasons of a failing memory, I might add. Um, but we have to pose the question, right, of, well, is there such a thing as art anymore? Right? Is there such a thing as fine art anymore when we live in an age of the image, right, of the proliferation of the image, potentially Plato's worst nightmare? Okay. The way that we're going to initially look at how the course unfolds, moving on to slide 4 now. We're going to take a series of images, okay, mostly artworks, okay, to illustrate some of the key perspectives that we will adopt during the course of our course, during the um, unfolding of our course. Let me just say that we will tend to privilege the visual arts and particularly painting uh, as we go. We simply, all the various art forms from um, poetry and music and so on and so forth. Um, we're simply not going to be able to, cover everything in depth, right? So it will be largely uh, images that we'll be looking at, okay? Um, in starting with these images, I'm trying to kind of invert that philosophical procedure, that normal philosophical procedure, which can start from a place that's excessively abstract, okay? That would be opposed to the sort of, way in which art history or criticism would proceed, okay? So I want to really anchor some of the problematics in particular images, okay? And that's what we'll look at in the next um, video after this one. But that's all for this one now. Okay.